afternoon. Welcome to today's Ambassadors Forum at AIM. This is the second of the year and a continuing program that we've had now for the last couple of years. Excellency Ambassador Neil Reeder, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, faculty, students, alumni, friends, and guests, good afternoon. Again, welcome to the Asian Institute of Management, and welcome to the Zuellig Graduate School for Development Management Ambassadors Forum. You may or may not know, but last week we had a ceremony to rename the Center for Development Management by its new name, now known as the Zuellig Graduate School for Development Management. The goal of the Ambassadors Forum is to broaden the regional and global perspectives of AIM students, to provide a venue for the exchange of information for foreign ambassadors in Manila, and to educate the community on international relations and development issues and trends. Through this forum, ambassadors and embassy officials are invited to discuss their country's views on Asian issues such as political ideologies and regimes, economics, finance, trade, demography and migration, climate change and energy, strategic security and worldviews. Mr. Ambassador, you don't have to actually cover all of that.
We'll go to bed.
We'll go on. For the ambassador, let me just introduce this group that's before you. A good number of this group comes from the Masters in Development Management program, but we also have members from the MBA school, the Graduate School of Business. The Masters in Development Management program is now in its 25th year, and it goes back to the 70s when AIM first started getting involved in rural development management projects as a business school. The learnings from that were translated into short courses. The short courses were put together, and in 1989 we held our first Masters in Development Management program. Today's group is the 25th version of that, and we will celebrate in grand style at graduation in December, because we'll be the 25th class. Okay? And Mr. Ambassador, this class comes from 15 different countries, all across South Asia. So we're in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. We are from Southeast Asia, so we're covered in the Mekong, all the Mekong countries, including South China. So that's Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. We have Indonesia, we have the Philippines, we have Timor-Leste. We also have PNG, Papua New Guinea. We have China, and we have our token Westerner from the Netherlands. It's the most diverse class here at AIM. This afternoon we have the honor of having a distinguished guest from the Embassy of Canada, representing the Dominion of Canada. The Canadian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Neil Reeder, was appointed Ambassador of Canada to the Republic of the Philippines in July 2013 and presented his credentials to His Excellency President Benito Aquino III on December 2 of 2013. So he's barely been 4 months. He earned his Bachelor of Arts with high honors at the University of Saskatchewan in 1979, a Bachelor of Journalism with honors at Carleton University in 1981. He joined the Department of External Affairs and International Trade in 1981 and has served abroad at Canadian diplomatic missions in Rabat, Washington, D.C., and Hong Kong. He was High Commissioner of Canada to Brunei Darussalam from 1999 to 2002, and until August 2005, he was Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Canada in Mexico. He was Canadian Ambassador to Costa Rica, with concurrent accreditation in Nicaragua and Honduras from 2007 to 2010. He was awarded the Order of Francisco Morazan by the President of Honduras in recognition of his efforts to promote peaceful resolution to the political crisis in Honduras in 2009. So, Mr. Ambassador, I think you're here at the right time, because we are we will be signing the peace agreement with for the Bangsamoro tomorrow on March 27. In Ottawa, Ambassador Reeder undertook assignments in the East Asia Division, the Francophone Africa Division, and the Caribbean and Central American Relations Division. He also served as Public Liaison Officer in the Arms Control and Disarmament Division. From 1995 to 1997, he was Foreign Policy Analyst for Asia Pacific in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Secretariat in the Privy Council Office, where he was awarded a Public Service Outstanding Achievement Award by the Clerk of the Privy Council. From 1997 to 1999, he was Director of the Media Relations Office. From 2005 to 2007, he was Director General of the Communications Bureau. And prior to his assignment in Manila, Ambassador Reeder was Director General of the Latin America and Caribbean Relations Bureau, 2010 to 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, join me in welcoming His Excellency Ambassador Neil Reeder.
So I think everything's working here. Can you hear me okay? We'll move this back. For tall people, microphones are always a challenge. So I prefer to be wired, a wired ambassador rather than a microphone ambassador. Well, thank you very much, Dean Luce, and again, greetings to the faculty, management, and of course all of you for your very warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. My first time to the Institute, and I hope it's not my last time. Very impressed to read about the work that you're doing. In particular, you know, the number of alumni that you've got, the range of the programming, 40 years of delivering these programs is very interesting. Some of the work also with open enrollment and learning is of interest to me because Canada is a country has a great deal of expertise as well at the university level in that area, and we're promoting open learning across our country. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Canada and the Philippines, our relationships, and then look at Canada, ASEAN, and Canada and the Asia Pacific region. It's a challenging audience because many of you come from countries in the region that I may not know, so I may not be able to respond if there's sort of country-specific questions, but I'll try to do my best in the question and answer session. Let me say, you know, I've had a very interesting 4 months in this country. As was mentioned by the Dean, I arrived 4 months ago, and I've already traveled quite a bit in the country, into the Visayas several times because of Typhoon Yolanda assistance to Cebu. I was earlier this week in Gensan for my first trip. I was in Davao 2 weeks ago. I'm going to northern Luzon for a week in May. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to get out and meet people and connect with Filipino people. So it's really been really interesting. I arrived a week before Typhoon Yolanda. Some accused me of having brought the typhoon with me. But in fact, I came from Vancouver, so you can't blame me. But I mention that because it really did shape the first 2 months of my work, just as it has shaped the country and the aftermath of Yolanda and all it's implied. It's the first time, you know, there was a CV that was read and I've done this and that. I've never actually been in a humanitarian crisis in an embassy anywhere. I've dealt with the Haiti earthquake from Ottawa, but I've never actually been in a humanitarian situation like we saw in this country. So it was really quite a learning experience for me, but we had a terrific embassy that helped us out. And Canada, as you may know, was very quick to assist the Philippines in the hour of need, and was one of the first countries to come in with assistance and one of the longest countries to stay. We provided $20 million in humanitarian assistance. We set up a matching fund, the Government of Canada, whereby any dollar contributed by Canadians to charitable organizations in Canada is matched by the Canadian government. And we expect an announcement within a week of additional funds for Yolanda early recovery, which will be based on that matching fund. So we're very pleased with that. We also are the 5th largest donor to the Central Emergency Relief Fund of the United Nations. in that respect, we provided direct assistance to the Philippines as well. Another decision that was taken at that time, we provided $15 million for the creation of a mobile field hospital, which was deployed by the Canadian Red Cross to Ormoc. I visited twice Ormoc, and at that time, because of Yolanda, the main hospital in Ormoc flooded, and the roof was blown off. All the operating rooms had 6 feet of water in them. They were unable to do any surgery at all in the main hospital. Canada and Norway came with field hospitals that were deployed, and we assisted with emergency surgery, gynecology, deliveries, cesareans. I was there with the Minister of International Cooperation of Canada. We were at one of the tents. The Canadian doctor popped his head out with the newborn baby in his arms. This was the contribution of Canada at that time, until the hospital in Ormoc began to recover and rebuild. And 2 weeks ago, we donated that field hospital to the Philippine Red Cross for deployment in any future emergencies. We also deployed 360 members of our disaster assistance team, which is called the DART. They were deployed to provide humanitarian relief on the island of Panay, and they worked across all 4 of the provinces on the island for over a month at the height of the crisis. We worked very closely with the Philippines Armed Forces, with the Philippines Police, local and municipal authorities. The Canadians came to clear roads. Over 100 kilometers of roads were cleared. At one point, the highway between Iloilo City and Rojas was impassable, with fallen trees, with debris. Telephone poles were snapped like that. Metal poles were bent like a fork. The force of the wind completely destroyed the top end of the island. So Canada assisted with that. We helped with repairing bridges, infrastructure, and generators. We also transported from Canada a number of our Griffin helicopters by C-130. These were brought in to assist mobile medical teams. These are Canadian medical doctors with the armed forces who were deployed into the communities all across the north of Panay Island to treat some 6,500 patients. A number of these patients suffered from trauma. They had not seen a doctor of any kind in the first 2 weeks after the typhoon, and the first assistance they received were from Canadians. It's also interesting to note the first faces they saw in some of these communities were Filipino-Canadian faces. We had 15 liaison officers deployed with the Canadian forces who were the descendants of immigrants to Canada from the Philippines. They spoke the dialects, Ilonggo. Some of them were actually from the island. So they were able to go into these communities, determine the needs, radio back, deploy the helicopters to provide assistance. And of course, it was quite a cultural shock, if you will, for those already suffering from the trauma of the typhoon to see a Filipino face in the Canadian Armed Forces uniform speaking Tagalog to them, sitting in Antique and Aklan and Iloilo in their communities. So it was quite I think a very nice statement about the diversity that characterizes Canada, but also the fact that people could talk to our liaison officers in their own language. We also established a major water purification program where we produced 500,000 liters of clean water for people across the island. At that point, there was no fresh water available. This reverse osmosis technique, which we had established, allows us to take any kind of water except salt water or sewage and convert it into drinkable water within 48 hours. This process was used to provide water to people across the north end of Panay. We also distributed 300 tons of food and relief supplies for the United Nations and humanitarian agencies using these helicopters. So I'm very proud of the contribution of Canada. I wanted to mention that because it marked the first few months of my presence here, but it also marked, I think, Canada-Philippine relations. We had a visit recently of the United Nations Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, who spoke about Canada's operation in Rojas, our bases in Rojas City, as the best example of civilian-military cooperation in a humanitarian crisis that she had ever seen. We're going to work with the Philippines through the early recovery and reconstruction phase. And as I mentioned, we expect to have additional announcements coming in the very near future. In terms of the relationship, maybe briefly I'll talk about Canada and the Philippines. This is a relationship that began 54 years ago. Our embassy in Manila, with 160 staff, is the 8th largest embassy in the world, our embassy in the world. We also have an honorary consul based in Cebu. We've had a series of high-level visits over the past 2 years. Prime Minister Harper was here in November 2012. This was the first visit by a Canadian leader to the Philippines in 15 years. Ironically, I was here on the last visit by a Canadian Prime Minister, which I think was in 1996. I was in Privy Council at the time, and I was working for the Foreign Policy Advisor to then Prime Minister Chrétien. And I was asked to go along on this trip. And all I remember of Manila was the Peninsula Hotel, because that's all I did was I worked. We were all based at the Peninsula, and I was writing speeches and organizing some of the activities, but never really got to see anything of Manila. I remember the traffic, which is an understatement given what we have for traffic today, but I do remember the traffic. I got to know the Peninsula Hotel very well, but I didn't see much of the city. So here I am 15 years later. Prime Minister Harper was also the first G8 leader to visit the new administration of President Aquino. We've also had visits by our Foreign Minister, John Baird, and as I mentioned, by Christian Paradis, who's our development minister, who was the first development minister to come from abroad at the time of Typhoon Yolanda. A couple other points I'll mention about our relationship. International development is very important in this country. We began development cooperation following the restoration of democracy in 1986. We have ensured that our efforts are directly aligned with the Philippines development plan. We support sustainable economic growth by improving the climate for investment and protecting the economic interests of the poor. We're also very focused on working with the local government units, the LGUs, and trying to strengthen the capacity of local governments to administer their regions, to simplify business processes, regulations, and trying to assist them in a strengthened capacity of governance, which I think is critical for development. We also have done a lot of work with grassroots organizations in the country. As I mentioned, on the weekend I was in General Santos, went to Lake Cebu, very interesting project that our development agency is funding, assisting women entrepreneurs from the Tagoli and other indigenous communities in Lake Cebu who were building a capacity through micro-entrepreneurship, microcredits, to be able to bring handicrafts to a central facility to market that to tourism. Because Mindanao is now seeing a resurgence. There was actually tours when I was there, tourist buses, and this way the young women entrepreneurs can actually find an outlet for their products. So we help them with setting up a cooperative that's marketing their products. We help them develop a tourism circuit so that visitors will have 3 or 4 places to visit on a circuit, help the infrastructure so that tourists can have a comfortable visit, and also train tour guides. So in this respect, we're helping the tourism sector. It could be others, but this was a good project, I thought, in terms of building up capacity at a micro level. We're also working with governments and NGOs to deliver programs to help the poor develop business skills, as I mentioned, and improve access to financing and markets. It's wonderful to have a good handicraft industry, but if you can't market it, you're not going to go very far. And I'm sure you appreciate in this room that these are one of the biggest development challenges that we've got. I should talk about people-to-people linkages. It seems everybody I meet in the Philippines has a family connection to Canada. Many of you come from countries that may have family connections, but as you know, we're a very multicultural society. We now estimate about 800,000 Canadians of Filipino origin. This is the largest and fastest growing community in Canada at present. I had a visit from Canada in January of Thomas Verga, who's a very interesting individual. His father was a governor, his grandfather was a governor in Luzon, and he is the first Filipino-Canadian senator. So it's a very historic moment. He's a leader of the Filipino Canadian community. Canada continues to be an important destination for Filipinos looking to emigrate, looking to work, or looking to study. This is now the second busiest visa office in the world, and we're issuing, as of the last full year for statistics of 2012, 33,000 visas for permanent residents in Canada, over 8,000 foreign worker visas, and over 30,000 temporary resident and visitor visas. I mention this because the foreign worker program is very important to us, because we do have gaps where there's not enough labor or people aren't available to undertake certain jobs in Canada, and we're filling those jobs increasingly with temporary labor from abroad, including from the Philippines. Tourism is also very important. I talked a little bit about the tourism promotion that we're doing in the local microeconomy here. Canada is one of the top 10 sources of tourists to the Philippines, in excess of 100,000 annually. And the Tourism Promotion Board projects that that will grow by 10% annually over the next 5 years. There's also reverse tourism based on Filipino ties to the Philippines, where we're getting people coming back from Canada. We had 275 who came in January. They were escaping the Canadian Olympic. And they came over with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to rediscover their roots. Some of these people had not been here for 20 years, some hadn't been here for 40 years. They went to Boracay, they went to Iloilo, they went to Manila, they met President Aquino. We had a reception for them. And it was a very heart-rending moment if you consider a group that, in some cases, 2 generations had not returned to Canada for the first time in 40 years. They came to the Philippines for the first time in 40 years. They came back to where they grew up, went back to their hometowns. It was quite touching. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future. I have to mention the education file. Obviously, in this room, I can't miss the opportunity to do an advertisement. But we do have a lot of 250,000 foreign students in Canada. This is a huge number across the country. That includes both university, college, and high school. And we are a major magnet for international students. We encourage international students. You have a safe environment, a multicultural environment. You have a modest cost of education because we have state-funded universities. There are no private universities in Canada. They're funded by the state. Tuition fees, with all respect to my American cousins, are about half the price of the United States. So keep that in mind if you want to do a master's, something other than we have good MBA programs, masters in finance, masters in human resources, masters in international business, and of course PhD programs. And I would say that the bursary programs are based on university entrance, but at that level, the universities in Canada are quite open and generous with bursaries because they're wanting to draw in the masters and PhD students. So I certainly would encourage you to consider that. And I mention safety not because it's an issue, but having come out of Latin America for the past 9 years, I was very conscious that parents would look for safety for their children. If you're coming out of Colombia, you're coming out of Panama, out of Mexico, countries like that, people looked for a safe environment to send their kids, and Canada is certainly that, and people can feel safe when their families are there. So I certainly wanted to mention that. 250,000 foreign students. We're finding a steady interest in going to Canada, and those numbers continue to increase. On the demographics, I should mention the outflow of Filipino permanent residents to Canada has also had an impact now on Tagalog is the fastest growing language group in Canada. And if you go across Western Canada, you go into the service sector, the restaurants, the McDonald's, anywhere you want to go in the country, you're going to start to hear Filipino dialects spoken across the country. It's quite interesting. We're a multicultural country. A city of Toronto has 100 languages spoken on the streets. We're a bilingual country, English-French, but we do have many languages spoken. Vancouver is now 50% Asian Pacific origin on the basis of outflows from primarily from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from China, and now from the Philippines. About 200,000 Filipinos in Vancouver itself. So it's a very significant language group, and it's certainly growing. We also hope that this demographic will generate more business and trade and investment between the two countries over time. Maybe just to touch on the Aquino administration's agenda, we're very supportive of their work on reform and economic development. Canada has funded, for example, programs to support the development of public-private partnerships in the Philippines. We see this as a very high priority. We've provided assistance on issues like freedom of information. We also have been very central to the Bangsamoro peace process. Canada provided expertise from our Mounted Police, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, to develop a proposed policing structure for the new Bangsamoro entity. That will be unveiled in about 2 weeks, that report, but we have provided that assistance as part of our commitment to the Bangsamoro, and I'll be attending the signing ceremony tomorrow, along with a cast of 1,500, I'm told, so I hope we'll find a seat somewhere, but it will be quite a major event and one that we really do want to support, and all governments want to support. Our message to the government here has been that this is important in itself because you're ending 40 years of turmoil, 150, 175,000 deaths. It's the longest running insurgency in Southeast Asia. We want to see a new Bangsamoro opportunities in the South. And what it really does, if it holds and if it's implemented and people commit to it, it provides the opportunity for particularly investment in the poorest region in the country. It also provides the opportunity for development assistance. Because the donors have been very cautious, apart from the UN, about working in parts of Mindanao because of security issues and other factors. So in that respect, I think the events of tomorrow mean a lot for tomorrow's sake, but they also mean a lot down the road in terms of what that portends for this country going forward. Trade and investment, maybe a couple of words. $1.5 billion in bilateral trade. It's not a bad figure. We would like to see that increase. Our exports into this market are about $700 million annually. It's funny because we have a very high-tech modern economy in Canada, but in terms of this trading relationship, a lot of it is primary products for some reason. I'm from Western Canada, so I'm pleased to see, wheat exports, barley exports, lentils, specialty crops. Pork exports are also significant, where this is our 8th largest export market for Canadian pork. We know the Filipinos love pork, and we love to sell it to them. Their lechon's better than ours. And we're looking at the beef market as well, the upper end of the beef market in the retail sector. We also have some significant Canadian investments. The two largest and long-standing insurance companies, Manulife and Sun Life, are both Canadian. Sun Life has been here for 121 years. It's a remarkable record. Manulife more than 100 years. We also have major investments in the BPO sector. That's in both Manila and in Cebu. And over 20,000 people in the country who are employed by Canadian BPO operations. Bombardier Aerospace, for example, which is the world's 3rd largest aircraft manufacturer, has opened a BPO facility in Cebu employing 400 people. And they do all the back office financial transactions for Bombardier Aerospace worldwide. So you go into this office in Cebu and you've got a Brazil desk, a Mexico desk, a Middle East desk, and they're all managing financial transactions for those branches of Bombardier abroad. And this is all with 400 young graduates from Filipino schools who've got accounting degrees, business administration. They speak good English, they're well educated, and it's very pleasing to see that, because what it means is we're offering, through our investment, opportunities for young people in the Philippines to work and to stay. Because what we don't talk about when we talk about out-migration, including to Canada, is of course there's often a family impact of having families separated, of having people go work abroad. In this instance, we're offering opportunities here. So people don't have to leave Cebu, they can stay with their families and have very good jobs with the support of Canadian investors. Manulife has also opened a second BPO center, which will also be in Cebu. And TELUS, which is Canada's 3rd largest telecoms company, is a major BPO employer in this country. So if you call 1-800-TELUS from Canada, you're going to get Manila on the other end of the line. The funny thing is that because there's so many Filipinos now in Canada, including Western Canada, where TELUS is the strongest, they call the 1-800 number and they get a Filipino accent on the other end of the phone, and they go chattering off in Tagalog and have a great time. And they forget what they were supposed to talk about. Well, where are you from? And how's it going there? What's the weather like? So that's the globalized economy I guess we live in. It's remarkable. Let me just say a few words about Canada and the Asia-Pacific region. I think I've given you a bit of a flavor for the Asia-Pacific identity of Canada. I mean, you know, I'm a product of European migration to Canada. Canada is a product of first French and then English colonial presence. So our roots are English and French. We have 2 official languages. About 22% of the population has French as a first language, primarily in the province of Quebec. That's an earlier history. That was then amplified, particularly in the 20th century, by waves of immigration, particularly from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. Every convulsion during the 2 wars, and every convulsion, particularly in the former Soviet Union, led to outflows, and many of them went to Canada. My father ran a construction company in my hometown of 5,000 people in Saskatchewan, and all of his staff were European immigrants. Some had very little English they learned. They came from Hungary, they came from Poland, they came from Ukraine, they came from Russia, and they were all expelled by various periods of turbulence in that period. Their families left. Many of them left because of Soviet invasion, the Soviet presence, and they could not tolerate that regime, and they therefore left, and many came to Canada and settled in Western Canada. Canada, just in passing, has taken a very strong position on the situation in Ukraine. We're offended by what Russia has done. It's in violation of international law. We're also very conscious of Ukraine and the fragility of the Ukraine because of the fact that we've got 1 million Canadians who are of Ukrainian descent. And in Western Canada, they have a very major presence. So, and that has led us to be particularly preoccupied by the situation in Ukraine. But I mention that because it was a European focus to our identity earlier in time, but increasingly we're becoming an Asia-Pacific entity and very active in Asian affairs. We were a founding member of APEC in 1989, and we're involved in more than 30 different APEC forums. We're also a founding member of the ADB, of course, established here in Manila, and we're the 7th largest shareholder in the ADB. We just had a very large delegation of Canadian businesses, about 30 that came looking for, through the ADB contracting process and procurement, looking for opportunities for goods and services, consulting, and that kind of thing. So we're very plugged into the ADB's work, and we support their work on reducing poverty throughout the region. With the ASEAN group, we became a dialogue partner in 1977. We're one of only 10 countries that have that partnership with the ASEAN. We've become a very significant partner of them with cooperation on political and security issues, regional integration, economic interests, interfaith dialogue, crime and terrorism, and disaster risk reduction. We appointed our first ambassador to ASEAN in 2009. 2010, we signed a treaty of amity with ASEAN and a joint declaration on trade and investment. We're trying to work with ASEAN to increase our trade and investment in both directions. And we're seeing now Petronas, for example, of Malaysia, which is bought into the gas sector in British Columbia. They'll probably have an LNG capacity very, very soon to export back to Asian markets. We also created a Canada-ASEAN Business Council. This was launched by International Trade Minister Thats to advance private sector cooperation. We're also assisting ASEAN on issues in relation to financial sector integration and dealing with natural disasters, which is a very important area of concern. We just approved a $4.5 million grant to the ASEAN PPP Infrastructure Center in Singapore. This will be a center that will assist the ASEAN countries in developing PPPs in their countries to meet the infrastructure challenges and help them find and deploy some of the pools of capital that are out there that are not being utilized. What we found is a lot of these countries cannot finance the major infrastructure projects themselves, and the PPP model is a good one. Canada has about 60 PPPs up and running, so we have a lot of best practices that we can share with them. We're also providing $2 million to the PPP Center in Manila and sharing best practices with the PPP. I was asked just to go to an APEC meeting in China about a month ago, and the APEC is developing an advisory panel on PPPs, which will also provide assistance, starting with the PPP Center in Jakarta, which is just starting, but also looking at other countries that wish to develop that expertise to help them develop the infrastructure that they all need. We've also been very engaged in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP negotiations. This is a huge undertaking. The market of nearly 800 million people and the combined GDP of close to 40% of the world economy. We think it's an opportunity to strengthen partnerships in Asia Pacific, but also drive a regional economic integration. Canada is a very strong free trading country. We are among the most open and transparent economies in the world. We've a very large network of free trade agreements, starting first with the United States, the original FTA, which became the NAFTA. We have 5 to 7 FTAs in the Americas. In Asia, we are pursuing trade discussions with India and Japan, and have started exploratory discussions with Thailand. Prime Minister Harper was in Seoul 2 weeks ago. We signed an FTA with South Korea. That's our first FTA in Asia, so we're very pleased to see that. Our exports to Asia have doubled since 1995, and foreign investment has doubled in that same period, while Asian investment in Canada has increased by 4 times. We see the growth of trade markets helping to reduce poverty and generating an emerging middle class, which we're starting to see in a number of countries, including in Southeast Asia, of course, and in China. We see great potential for Canada to engage in the economic expansion in the region, but we're also engaging beyond the area of trade and investment. There's a lot of high-level political interest in Canada in the region, 100 visits by cabinet level or our Prime Minister in the past 4 years. We've also doubled the number of our diplomatic and consular offices in China and in India. I mentioned earlier the people-people ties between Canada and the Philippines, but if you take Canada and the larger Asia-Pacific region, 60% of all new permanent residents in Canada originate from Asia. 60% of foreign students in Canada are from Asia. In 1970, that figure was less than 20%. It's tripled since then. We're also making important contributions to peace and security in the region and in development programming. We have bilateral development assistance programs in 7 countries in Asia Pacific, a regional program for Southeast Asia. We've provided in the last fiscal year over $800 million in ODA to the region, excluding Pakistan and Afghanistan, which have separate budgets. We're also working to prevent natural disasters and catastrophes, as I mentioned, working with the ADB on a disaster risk management trust fund. And finally, on the security and counterterrorism side, we've done a lot of work through the Shangri-La Dialogue, the Rim of the Pacific exercise, and through counterterrorism consultations. In the Philippines, we've contributed $1.4 million to train over 1,000 first responders to deal with any threat of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive incidents. One can never be too careful with these things, and Canada has tried to assist so that governments are prepared for that kind of eventuality. So I think, as you can see, it's a wide-ranging relationship. I'd like to leave some time for questions. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. I would normally say maraming salamat po, but I suspect that this audience, it's a multilingual audience, so I'm not quite sure what language I should, so I'll just stick to the Queen's English. Thank you very much. I guess I should say my Queen's English to be correct. It don't apply to your Queen's. And you can come and join the party if you like. Go ahead.
I've seen over here nearly 60% of your residents are from Asia Pacific. So integration of the social and socio-psychological issues, how is it being integrated there, and how, being a Canadian, how you are getting yourself and your ideas from your personal perspective?
Well, about 60% of the permanent residents come from Asia Pacific. Those are primarily from China, from India, and from the Philippines. Those are the three leading source countries for migration. Those three probably comprise half of that number. So it's quite, these are the three core countries. We actually have this, to take the case of the Philippines, for example, there's kind of two programs. Before they go, they have social integration programs here. So we're saying, I met a group last week with our Deputy Minister of Immigration, 60 people going to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Well, Winnipeg, Manitoba. So how do you get a job in Winnipeg? How do Canadians behave? What are the do's and don'ts of social etiquette in Canada? How do you get a health card, insurance? You know, all that orientation is done before they go. Plus the Filipino government, through its Filipinos Abroad program, also has a separate orientation that they do as well. And then once they arrive, each of the provinces that receive that community have programs to orient them, to help them get documents, to prepare your CV, how do you find a job. CVs, as I learned, I didn't know this, but CVs are very different in the Philippines than in Canada. If you don't have the right model of CV, it's just like, you know, bottom of the pile. So you've got to get ready for what's to come. And all that training is meant to sort of assist people with the integration. The good thing about many of the Asian immigrants, as you'll appreciate, is that the family network is very broad. So in fact, they will often have family members to stay with. So the integration is facilitated because they're not ending up in some cold hotel room somewhere, but they actually have family to stay with. And that bayani hand culture of the helping hand usually means that the immigrants have a better transition.
Thank you, sir. Another one, just a bit.
Yeah.
That's the last one. 4.5 million you have invested for public-private partnership
Right,
in ASEAN.
right.
So after 2016, is there any best practice you have learned from that investment, what we can use for other countries from your learning?
Well, what I could have brought it, I guess, but we've got a deck that we actually produced in Canada. We have a PPP center in Toronto where they are a national entity that promotes PPPs in Canada. So they have a best practices document that they share with other countries, how to establish a PPP, how to manage it, what the best approach is to sourcing funding, for example, and then the long-term transition of the project back to the local government, for example. So these are the kinds of things that we've learned. We've had, you know, like many things, we've had good and bad experiences with PPPs, and we're just sharing our experiences. We've got a lot of, you know, bridges, airports, hospitals, prisons now, which are successful PPPs. So we're getting quite a bit of experience, and that's why we wanted to share it with the Asian community. But what we're doing with the funding in particular is to provide expertise on PPPs, to give advice to the government of Indonesia, for example, on how to set up this center, how to draw on the best resources you can, how to manage a PPP project, the role of the state, the role of the private sector, etc., how to tap pools of financial capital. There's a lot of financial capital through the pension funds, for example, through the insurance companies, through the banks internationally, that are looking, you know, for places to invest money. And if it's a safe, reliable investment environment, they're prepared to commit money for long-term infrastructure. But you've got to tap those resources. So how do you do that? So it's a whole range of expertise that can be shared. And again, we've been through all this for better or worse. So we just want to share it and make sure that people draw upon that. And it sort of telescopes down the amount of time you need to be PPP ready if you can learn from other countries like Canada. Australia is also very engaged, to be fair. I'm not saying we're the only one. The Australians have deployed, as part of their assistance, a PPP expert into the center in Jakarta, giving them direct advice. So they're very, very keen. They're also very supportive of the center here in the Philippines. The Philippines isn't a bad model. They've got about 3 or 4 PPPs running. Not bad. And, you know, some 50 in the pipeline. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. But they're certainly making good progress. Please.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. I have a principal from Ontario, Canada, and it's only 2 weeks ago that a customer of ours in the Philippines sent out a telegraphic transfer, but it so happened that it has to go through a New York bank. Surprisingly, the telegraphic transfer was not honored. So my customer here had a problem. I told the Canadian firm just to manufacture the item and the payment will come because they need to have the goods arrive here before Holy Week so that they could maintain the plant. That's the shutdown of most plants in the Philippines because that's a 1 whole week vacation. So how can you resolve that, for instance? Are there a lot of Canadian companies using U.S. banks to do their financial?
Why would they use the U.S. bank?
That's what surprises me.
No reason to. I don't know, I can't comment on a particular case, but it doesn't seem to be very logical to go through the United States when you've got, the biggest and most stable banks in the world right now are Canadian. Scotia Bank has branches all through the region, Royal Bank. I don't know, it's a private issue, but it strikes me they should just be doing it directly.
And they claim to be international, an ISO 9000 something anyway.
And the company's in Canada?
Ontario.
What product is it?
It's Wild Mess Conveyor Belt. Wild Mess Belt of Canada Limited. If I visit them, I go with my wife and I go to Niagara Falls. She drives across Niagara Falls and then we meet at Hilton. And then
You gave me your card, right?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
It
Give me your card afterwards and I'll see if we can help you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get 10% of that commission.
Another personal question. You remind me of my trip to Glen
Personal
Eagles
question.
because you're in Scottish.
Yeah.
I love Glen Phillips. Anything that's Glen. Have you been back to Scotland?
Not for a long, long time. No. My mother's side is Scottish, but I haven't been back.
I got it from your name.
But it's a great, great part of the world.
It is.
Indeed. Thank you.
Years.
Good afternoon. I'm Henry Espicon. I wish to congratulate the Canadian Embassy for
Sorry, who's
winning
I can't see.
the
Where's the mic? Where's the mic? Sorry.
the Pig Pyro. You are the champion for the Pig International Pyro Musical Competition in SMX last Saturday.
Did we win? I went to the Canadian display, but I didn't hear the results.
Oh yeah, you're the champion, the Canada.
Thank you very much. It was fabulous to show.
Fabulous show.
But I didn't know we won. I was in General Santos.
Ah, I see. Yes. You're the champion for 2014.
Terrific.
This is the question. I understand that Canada and USA had a mutual understanding that is an attack to one means an attack to both countries. The Philippines had just inked a deal on defense with the Canadian suppliers for 4.5 billion pesos. The question is, since you mentioned that your cousin is also America, and the Philippines, when it comes to national defense and security within Asia, we have an issue with China. That means buying this defense in Canada would have an adversarial effect with the current tension between Philippines and China, because we deny the fact that Philippines also had cousins with China. Or it would be better for the President of the Philippines to have also a mutual understanding with China that an attack to one means an attack to both of us.
Well, it's a sovereign decision for the government of the Philippines to decide on the nature of its defense relationship with the United States. How about that as a cautious diplomatic answer?
Exactly. This is the question of business ethic of dealing arms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, but I guess your government has to determine how and what kind of relationship it wants with the United States. We have a relationship with the United States. We also have a shared border. We have a shared history in some respects. We're partners of the United States in NORAD, aerospace and defense. We're partners in NATO.
Yes.
So it's a different environment.
Because this is my greatest apprehension is this. the US has so much debt with the China, and if the tension would come into reality, we might be a pawn to US or a short of payment, a token payment to US by the China or
Yeah.
yes, vice versa.
Well, I can tell you that what Canada's trying to do is to assist the Philippines in enhancing its defense posture, because it's a nasty world out there. Without naming countries, it's a nasty world. Look at Ukraine. Look what's transpiring. I mean, this is outrageous. It's a land grab of Crimea. So we've said to the government of the Philippines, because they want to modernize their defense capacity, they want to have better maritime surveillance, etc. We're happy to assist them. We'll be signing, it's already in the newspapers, but we'll be signing an agreement with them on utility helicopters, and they've announced an agreement with South Korea for fighter jets and such. I mean, you have to have a credible defense posture, especially in this part of the world, because this is not an easy part of the world to be in. It's different for Canada. We have a border, one border shared with the United States. You go up to the Arctic and it's a different environment, but there's no threat per se. But for the Philippines, it's more challenging. So I would say, it's prudent for the Philippines to commit to enhancing its defense capability. What you do with the United States is a sovereign decision for your president and his cabinet. Thank you.
Yes.
I didn't really answer that question.
Good answer. Thank you. Good answer. But no matter how we enhance our defense, the mighty China still were very small. And this is the reality is that Japan, they are the third largest economy in the world, and yet they have US base, and yet we don't have.
Yeah.
That's a big
I
question.
understand.
Good afternoon,
Good point.
Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah.
The mic is here already.
Okay.
Now, this is actually a question usually being brought up by Filipino migrants to Canada.
Right.
Well, maybe you are aware that here in the Philippines we do have several universities which have high standards of education, and that also, I think you also believe in the abilities and skills of Filipino workers.
Obviously.
Now, given that, the common concern of Filipino migrants to Canada is that how come their educational degrees and also their work experiences are usually not being recognized to be legitimately on par with the normative standards of the Canadian employers and also the accrediting associations in Canada. Now, I'd like to get your views regarding this.
Well, I mean, this is a challenge, obviously, for any country that receives foreign migrants. It's not unique to Canada. It's a question of accreditation. It's a question of professional associations in the host country that wish to ensure that the professional graduate from another country has got standards equivalent to what is expected in Canada. So if you're a nursing graduate or a doctor in Canada, you've gone through a certain training that we know and understand that's common across the country. It's very hard for them to accept without assessment. And a Filipino doctor, for example, they may want to have additional training. They have to write the medical exams and such. So I know it is a challenge. Yes, it is. It makes usually the first couple of years. This is part of our training that we do for people. Is get ready, because you might not be accepted automatically into a profession, into your profession, despite your skill sets and your experience. In the Philippines, because under the Canadian medical code, you need X, Y, and Z, and these are very closed systems. My brother's a medical doctor, and he went through very rigid training, and they will only accept, I think, maybe from the United States equivalency, so you've got to upgrade your skills, write additional exams. I can't hide that, that's a fact of life, but I think it's quite legitimate that we would want to have, especially people in those sorts of practices, to have a skill set and training exactly equivalent to what was given in Canada.
I actually mentioned this because I remember my former boss, who was already the executive vice president of investment house here,
Right.
and he's even a graduate of Ateneo and AIM.
Right.
But when he migrated to Canada, he ended up being a financial analyst only. While here in the Philippines, position of financial analyst is just a stepping stone for a fresh college graduate with no work experience yet.
And where is he now?
In Toronto.
And has he done well?
Well, I guess he's now a senior financial analyst too. He started as a junior one.
There's your answer.
It's a pity, you know.
No,
because
but it's a
an
pity
ADP
because,
already.
I mean, again, they've got to assess people. They can't just, well, at Ateneo, I mean, for a Canadian sitting on Bay Street, what is that? You know, he doesn't even know what it is. You can't
Yes, but
expect comparative jobs on the entry level. But the beauty of Canada, and that's an example, is you start here, you end up here. You know? Equality of opportunity and social mobility. That's what drives the economy. So now we're opening the doors to Filipinos without even degrees. We're bringing people on temporary labor, but you can go to Canada as a temporary worker. You can go to McDonald's, pour coffee for a year, and maybe you become a junior manager if you do well, and the Filipinos do well. So once you're a junior manager, all of a sudden, you're more of interest to the province. You might be potentially convert yourself into a landed immigrant because you've now proven that you could work at a higher level beyond just the entry level blue-collar workforce. So there's mobility within the immigration system as well. And the Filipinos take advantage of that because they do very well. So I think that's the important point, is that you might start out here, but you don't stay there forever. The Filipino is not going to be driving the taxi for 10 years. It might be for a year or two, and then they move on to something else. But I think there's pretty good mobility. So I think we have to recognize that. But those are good points. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellency. This is just a follow-up question to the lady. My question is, what is the chance, or is there really a chance of good opportunity for a professorial post in some of your university in Canada for a third world professor, for example, coming from the Philippines?
I really can't answer that. I don't know enough about that side of our work to really answer. I mean, there's a lot of foreign-born professors in Canada, no question. But I don't know how they determine equivalency for
What I mean is, a graduate of the Philippines having a PhD at UP
right.
and AIM, master's degree also with Ateneo, then
Yeah.
coming to Canada to teach there in a school of business, for example.
I don't think it would be a big issue, but I don't know for sure because I've not really dealt with that. But again, there's a lot of foreign-born professors, so there must be opportunities for them. And if you have an expertise in a certain niche, they're going to search you out, or you're going to find good opportunities. But I can't speak to that specific point. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sir, in addition to what the gentleman and the good lady was saying, there are hospitals and healthcare institutions accredited by Accreditation Canada International.
Right.
Our hospital is one of them, and the Doctors Hospital.
Right.
Seen us in your website, and the former ambassador was also promoting our different institutions. The question is, if you are a medical practitioner and you have been accredited by Accreditation Canada International, does that mean that these professionals here working in these institutions may practice in Canada as a practitioner, or do you have same question? It's actually the standards of it. We've institutions have gone through the standards of Accreditation Canada, and they're practically the same.
Right.
It's actually the Canadian standards.
Right.
Would you consider those health practitioners same as that in your institutions? Because they're the same standards, and as what these surveyors were telling us, they're the same standards.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I can't really answer that, and those are questions for immigration experts to confirm, or the the receiving institutions in Canada. But let me ask you, the nurses who have, coming from institutions that have accreditations in Canada approval, are they working directly as nurses in Canada when they arrive, do you know?
Yes.
They are.
They are.
Yeah, that's what I suspect. Doctors, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. That's
They've not gone into that arena yet, but that's why I'm asking you if that's the same. Anyway, the follow-up question is, I think Dr. Nanagas has a better view on the question of this immigration. Dr. Nanagas, he's from Asian Eye Institute.
Well, the follow-up question is really, will there be, because we are accredited by Accreditation Canada, will there be portability of the Canadian insurance system to Canadians coming over to the Philippines?
You mean health insurance?
Yes, let's say Canadians who would like to
I
seek
don't
health
know.
care in the Philippines with the Canadian insurance system, which is a one-payer insurance. It's really the government.
No, we have to have private insurance when we come here. That's my understanding, yeah. Retirees coming to the Philippines, I think, are under a different category because your government has set up a special retiree program. And I think they may have coverage under the Philippine system. But if you're traveling abroad, generally speaking, outside of Canada, you need private insurance to ensure that the insurer covers your costs should something happen when you're abroad. So our insurance, our Canadian insurance, is for in Canada. Filipinos going that way get health insurance when they arrive. I think they have 30 days where they have to have private health insurance coverage in Canada, and then they're covered by the provincial health program in the province where they are.
So few Canadians who come to the Philippines to have elective procedures done.
They should have private insurance. It's not really that expensive, but it's important because Any other questions? Please. Oh, go ahead. Here's the mic. Yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. I come from China, and you just mentioned about that there are so many overseas students in your country. If I'm right, I think Chinese students is most overseas students grow. And my question is that, is there any regulation of affirmative for the students, like just set up a proportion for the students from different groups, like Asian or Canadian or Latin America? There is any regulation of this? If there is no, could you please share us the strategy that Canada how to balance, how to keep the balance of your education occupation, or if there is, could you please share us your point of view of that?
Well, that's a good question. As far as I know, if you're talking about the professions like, say, a medical faculty or pharmacy or law, they will have a kind of a quota for foreign students versus Canadian. That's my understanding. But again, not really in the university environment right now. That's normally how it works. So there won't be a particular disposition against Chinese students or others. It's simply, we will keep, in the University of Alberta Medical School, we will keep, out of our 100 entry-level positions for, medical students, we will keep 10 for foreign students. And may the best 10 get in, based on marks, based on leadership, community activity, whatever they assess. But they don't identify within that subgroup where they have to come from. So it's very much sort of a foreign versus Canadian split. Because to be fair to Canadians, their parents have paid taxes all their life to, at a huge tax rate to generate the revenue to pay for that university, so that their children can go to school. They should have, therefore, the majority of spots. But even with that, Canada is very liberal vis-a-vis openness to foreign students. 250,000 students, that's a pretty open environment for study. But I think the quotas apply more to Canadian versus foreign. But that's only really in the specialized studies like medicine, pharmacy, that kind of thing, veterinarian studies, for example. And provinces do have some limits on foreign students. Thank you.
I expect so.
Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. In my past life, my exposure to Canada was through CEDA.
Yeah.
The MOUs, the Development Cooperation Agreement, were crafted in my office by me in particular.
In which country, sir?
Canada, sir. CEDA, Canadian
Yeah, but
National
your
Development.
country?
I'm from the Philippines.
Okay,
I'm an
so-
Italian of bureaucrat.
Yeah.
During my past life in NEDA, I was the one commenting on the MOUs and
Right.
the Development Cooperation Agreement,
Right.
in particular by me. But since I retired 11 years ago, I was into the Manpower Placement Agency, and we noticed that I kept receiving questions about the Canadian Migration Program. In particular, what is the difference between the provincial nominee and the federal program? They say it's easy to get into the provincial nominee, maybe 5 years or less. Into the federal program, it will take more than 5 years.
Yeah, we're trying to reduce the federal program waiting times, but they are longer. The provincial nominees are someone like I mentioned who may go, and then the ones that are there, a province, they're going, say, as temporary labor in a province, they're identified by the province as someone that they would like to have stay. Or the provinces can go out and identify very interesting migrants from abroad and bring them to that specific province. And then you have to make a commitment to the province for a certain number of years. But the provincial nominees programs are actually working very well. Because we also want to ensure that the flow of migration to Canada is balanced across the regions, right? What we're finding now is that the majority of the migrants are going to Toronto and Vancouver. Together, about 500,000 is the Filipino community.
What I know, Mr.
Those two
Ambassador,
cities.
we have agreements with Western Canada,
Right,
BC, Saskatchewan, Victoria, Alberta,
right.
crafted by the former immigrant to Canada, now a member of the Supreme Court, Justice Brion.
Right.
During his time was the Labor Secretary, he was a former immigrant to Canada.
Right.
And it was him, when he was Labor Secretary, he was the one who was responsible for the crafting of the labor agreements with 4 Canadian provinces in Western Canada. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. CETA now, by the way, is being wrapped into our foreign ministry. We've got a three-headed monster: trade, development, and politics, political affairs, all in one in an amalgamated department. It's similar to, I think the Australians have done this too. We'll see how it works. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
I'm a Filipino
Good for you.
and a graduate of AIM.
Magandang gabi. ¿Cómo está?
I believe in studying in the best schools anywhere in the world, but come back to the Philippines and contribute to the growth of the Philippines.
Good for you.
My question is, how do you see Canada in the next 10 years, 20 years? What role will it do in the global community? Thank you.
Thank you. And let me say, you've asked a lot of questions about migration. A lot of questions. It's never our intention to, Filipinos have to make a decision on the basis of their own experience, on the basis of their family, on the basis of their values, on the basis of their long-term interests. Are you leaving this country to go to another to stay? Or do you wish just to go for the short term and to come back? Because we don't want to draw people away necessarily. We might want to have you come and study. If you wish to stay after studies, you can. If you want to go back and enrich your country with the experiences and education you've achieved, you're more than welcome to do that. So it's a voluntary program, for example, with immigration. But we're conscious that we don't want to drain economies of talent either. So I'm always very happy to see Filipinos who've got a master's degree and came back. Why shouldn't you come back? Because if for every person that stays, their family members back here, and this is particularly a problem, of course, with your temporary labor problem, is the social impact of isolation of families that are separated, women working abroad, the men staying here running families. So we kind of tiptoe carefully through this because I think the risk is that there's a social cost to migration as well. If the whole family goes, that's one thing, but And if you go and then decide to stay, there's an impact on your family back here. I know there's economic benefit. I know there's remittances. 10% of your remittances come from Canada now. 2.5 billion a year. It's a lot of money. But there's also social costs back home. So we're kind of, torn on this. It's not easy. The other dimension is that for studies like at the PhD level now, during the course of your studies, if you decide you want to stay in Canada, you can actually get credit for eventual landed immigrant status for the time spent studying in Canada. So that's another dimension of this program. But we're an aging society. We're glad to have young people come from abroad, but at the same time, we don't want to, see them all stay and not go back to their country of origin. I really didn't answer your question. What was it again? You're on a different track. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, okay. That's the hard question. That's why I was avoiding it. Well, that's a big. How much time do we have? No, basically, I'm not going to go into too long, but we're a middle-sized country. We're a member of the G. What was the G8? Now it's the G7. By the way, we're officially excommunicating Russia. They're no longer at the table with us. Middle-sized country. I think a positive force in the international community. A high emphasis on protection of human rights. A high emphasis on promoting good governance, stability abroad. It's a values-based foreign policy. The Conservative government in Canada is very committed to promotion of human rights abroad and recognizing that we have to have a voice when there's abuse of human rights, for example, including minority rights, including rights to sexual orientation. Some of these issues are very, very difficult. I was just at a meeting in Gensan where Canada is assisting a dialogue and a potential resolution to City Council on respect for sexual orientation and minority sexual rights in Gensan, taking place in Davao as well. Why are we doing that? We didn't say we know better than you. We just said, respect for human rights, including sexual orientation, is a universal human right. It's recognized in the UN Charter. We believe it important that all countries respect the rights of minorities, be they sexual or others. That's a bit of a controversial issue, but that's the position we've taken, and our government's very vocal on that. We've been very, very engaged on the whole Ukraine issue. Our Prime Minister issued a statement today. We've basically pulled our ambassador out. We've led the G7 in this consultation. We've enacted sanctions against that government because we believe these are fundamental values. You can't just redraw the borders because some of those people over there feel Russian and speak Russian. It doesn't work that way. If you start diminishing international law and the respect for borders and sovereignty, where does it stop? And that has application in a number of countries and regions around the world. So those are the kinds of issues I think that we'll focus on. On the trade and investment side, I would say we will continue to be very, very focused on free trade, trade liberalization, on facilitating outward investment and inward investment to Canada. Very important for our economy. We're not growing at the Philippines rates, we're growing about 2% annually, but we're also a country with huge resources. We'd like to have investment in those resources. We're trying now, as I mentioned, to advance an LNG export capacity for the first time based on gas in British Columbia. Shale gas, shale oil is coming on as well. We're part of that boom along with the United States. So we're positioning ourselves really as an energy superpower. But we're trying not to be too dependent on the US market and to be able to export particularly gas to Asia, Japan, Korea, perhaps the Philippines. Philippines, your gas supplies are 5 years from running out, and you're going to have to get it somewhere. Maybe we can help you with that. Thank you. A lot of questions here. There's the microphone. Whoever has the mic controls the floor.
Good evening, Ambassador, and good evening, everyone. I think for the past 3 years, Canadian immigration is getting tougher and tougher. Application lodged 5 to 7 years ago were returned, investor program shut down, as well as the entrepreneur program. Now, provinces of Canada are releasing different skilled program and putting an in-demand list and with a very limited quota, like Saskatchewan 250 and Nova Scotia 150. even the federal program set 5,000 quotas.
Right.
And my question is, having seen this, where is Canada heading in terms of immigration program? Seems like you are now only giving very limited quota for everyone. What are we expecting this 2014 and this coming years?
Thank you. Another immigration question. I better become an expert fast in this job. I'm going to be facing lots of these questions. Well, actually, I guess, first of all, there's no quota. The good news is there's a target. And the target is actually more than the past few years. The target is 250,000 immigrants per year. So I would challenge this room to find any other country in the world that is welcoming 250,000 new migrants every year. There's many countries that don't welcome migrants. There's many countries that kick them out. There's many countries that push those boats off into the north, into the Mediterranean, and people drown. So I have nothing to, be apologetic about. I suppose some programs are slow, some are fast. All that is driven by labor demands in Canada. There may be situations where we've got enough. Again, if it's labor driven, if you've got enough welders coming out of Canadian institutions, we don't need the Filipino welders. That's the reality. We never committed to the Philippines that this would be, forever. It depends on, in this case, on the labor market. So some of those numbers go up, some of those go down, but the principle of the open and transparent immigration system, I think, is the best in the world. You go to the website, you do the little surveys, you do the points, you can see if you qualify, and there's no more transparent system anywhere in the world. So, we're very proud of it, but I appreciate that bureaucratically things might take longer than others, but there's certainly no turning away. And the fact that quota number, which you call the target, is actually quite a significant figure. Nobody in the world has got those numbers. Thank you. One more question. I'm running out of zip here. 6:30, you here.
Yeah, one last
You already had them. You can't ask a second.
Yeah,
Those are
yeah.
too tough.
One
Your
last.
questions are too tough. Somebody else has to answer. Ask the last one.
This is not a migration question.
Oh, thank you.
I understand why all the young people here are asking migration questions, but this is not one of them. I have been a long-time critic of GDP as a measure of economic performance. And I'm aware of an effort of a group of Canadian academics based at the University of Waterloo who created a what they call the Canadian Index of Well-being. It's based on eight categories of indicators.
Right.
And I'm just curious if this has been, if the Canadian government has adopted this and is using it for its own policy and decision making.
I'm not aware of it, but it certainly hasn't been adopted to my knowledge, because if you go back to our budget, they still talk about GDP growth and such. I hadn't seen that equation used by the government. The one I like is the McDonald's survey that they do in The Economist magazine. That's my favorite. That's the one that tells you cost of living. And they take the cost of a McDonald's, a Big Mac, like 20 different countries, and then they create the equivalence in US dollars to see which is the most expensive city in the world. So that's an important index, that one. And the Philippines actually comes in very, very low on that. So that's good. So go and enjoy your hamburger.
Well, it's an interesting index because
Yeah.
it incorporates standard of living, health, education.
Yeah, I'm aware of other things, but
Culture.
it's not government policy, I guess.
Similar to the gross national happiness
Right.
index of Bhutan.
Right. That's a good thing. Thank you.
Okay. Somebody here just whispered one last question before we end.
Well, I'm probably
Good afternoon, sir. Just a really easy question. Just want to ask you what is the best things you like in the Philippines compared to Canada? Thank you.
I like the weather. Well, Canada has great weather too, but I like the weather here. This is great weather. I grew up in a land of ice and cold. I'm from northern Saskatchewan, where for 5 months of the year you had severe cold, snow. I loved it. Played hockey, did everything. It was a wonderful lifestyle. But I've kind of gotten a little older, so I'm happy in warmer weather. So the Philippines for me is a great place to be.
So would you think about to migrate here?
It's
not possible.
You've raised a very interesting question. And in fact, you're going to see, I think, a reverse flow of snowbirds and retirees from Canada, United States who are coming. They're coming. My Latin American experience the last 9 years, there was a lot going to Central America, Costa Rica, Panama, Guatemala, Mexico. But I think the Philippines actually is well positioned to get retirees as snowbirds because of cost of living, quality of life, the weather. You can't deal with distance. That's one of the downsides is the travel time to get here. But I think you're gonna see growth there, and it's very, very tempting for me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we apologize to those who have questions. We cannot accommodate them anymore. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
We have a little something for you here from AIM.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts on immigration, defense, security, education. We are impressed that you could actually speak a lot of Filipino. You were only here since November.
I do my best.
Thank you very
Thank you very much.
Thank you everybody for coming. See you next month for the next ambassador's forum.